Hi, my name is Rick Edgman. I'm your instructor for Mgt602 Production Operations Management. This particular lecture corresponds to the 14th actual lecture of the semester, and it is a continuation of Lecture 13. Date-wise, this corresponds to the lecture of 17th of March, 2021, St. Patrick's Day. So for those of you who enjoy such days, happy St. Patrick's Day. Okay. That said, let's begin. Again, a continuance of the larger presentation, larger lecture that we started on Lean Enterprise methods, some history, some tools. What you'll be seeing today are a few tools, some of which you've seen before. It's just the context that happens to be a little bit different here. So let's begin with a reiteration or a re-examination of the plan, do, study, act cycle. That goes by different names. Sometimes it's called the Deming wheel or Deming cycle. Sometimes it's called plan, do, check, act cycle. If it's called the Deming cycle, it's because Dr. W. Edwards Deming, who we've talked about previously in this course, is the person who popularized it. The person who developed it was Dr. Deming's mentor, Walter A. Schuhart. However, plan, do, study, act cycle in recent decades has probably found its most welcome home in lean enterprise, lean manufacturing systems, so-called continuous improvement applications, especially within Japanese organizations and now companies that are embracing lean regardless of their nation of origin. So plan, do, study, act. You might recall that plan, do, study, act is a continuous improvement cycle simply described as plan a change in the process that you're examining, do the change, probably on a smaller scale because it may not be as effective as it needs to be or as you imagine that it might be. Study the results of the change, or the do, if you will, study the results of the change, and then act, which oftentimes means to implement more broadly, but sometimes means go back to where you were before because what you tried didn't work. However, a better way to carry out plan, do, study, act cycle is it's like going on a trip. You need to know where you're starting from. So first, let's lay that foundation of where it is that we're beginning with any given process that we're working on. Now, I would normally say basically establish whatever baseline results are. But we can do that in a more step-by-step fashion by referring to that as focus. So find, organize, clarify, understand, and start. Find specific aspects of the process, system, or product targeted for improvement with a clear focus on what is in need of improvement. Okay, what is in actual need, what will really deliver benefit if in fact we're successful. Organize. Put the right team together. Oftentimes these sorts of activities are done in teams. Sometimes by individuals, but often in teams. So assemble the right team that is sufficiently diverse in the competence that they bring to the table with sufficiently specific expertise so that they really are rooted in that particular process, system, or service that you're going to try and improve. So that's what we're looking for. Clarify. Clarify that improvement opportunity. Describe what happens if you're successful. What does improvement entail? What is it that you think you're going to be doing? And if so, what are the benefits? Understand the various causes or potential causes of the problems that are to be solved, as well as enablers of improvement. Start. Initiate the plan, do, study, act cycle by selecting an initial process, product, or system modification and identifying where change should occur in that process, product, or system. Once you've done those things, then you're in that place where you've got sort of baseline results ready to go. You need to know how you're doing now and why it is that you're making a change, what you expect to derive as a benefit from that change. So once you've got that done, focus. Now you move into plan, do, study, act, which is an ongoing cycle of continuous improvement. So it's focus, enter PDSA, and then continually work on improving performance. So plan, recognize the change opportunity, plan a specific change in the process. Do, implement the change, possibly on that smaller initial scale that we talked about because your change may not be as effective as it needs to be to justify the sort of investment that might be needed to make if you implement. So possibly on that smaller scale. Plan, do, study. Study the results of the implementation. You may be doing that through things like control charts or some other sorts of analytical means, but you are observing and documenting the performance now compared to where it was previously. And then act. And again, sometimes act will represent return to status quo, but there's a very good chance that it means to implement more broadly. Now, oftentimes what happens is that when you've studied and you've decided that you're going to act, that you're going to implement more broadly, we would insert an additional thing between study and act. And that would be standardize. That is, standardize the approach so that everywhere that you put it in place, that you put it in place in the same way, that it's uniform or standardized, instead of manifesting differently everywhere it is. Because if it's standardized, then any future changes can be made everywhere. Excuse me. And if it's not standardized, then what will happen is that you think you're implementing one thing, but you might be implementing 12. And then after you've acted, remember that you go into the next planning phase. So plan, do, study, act, plan, do, study, act, plan, do, study, act, or more accurately, plan, do, study, standardize, act, plan, do, study, standardize, act, plan, do, study, standardize, act, and so on. A never-ending cycle of continuous improvement. However, as you do that, you want to make sure that you hold on to the gains, maintain the gains, as you move further and further into the future with your continuous improvement activity. That is, you don't backslide, so to speak. So you can talk about that cycle in a little bit more detail if you want, and I've written that out on the slide for you if you choose to read it. I would pictorially describe this more like this. Focus, that is, establish baseline results up there at the top, then move into plan, do, study, act, with the necessary standardized activity between study and act if you choose to implement on a broader scale. And as you're going round and round and round and round, cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle of PDSA, be sure to hold on to the gains. Another tool that is often used in continuous improvement is SWOT analysis. We've talked about this before as well. You've probably seen it in other contexts. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Remember that strengths and weaknesses are internal to the organization. Opportunities and the threats reside outside the organization. Strengths and weaknesses represent positives, weaknesses and threats represent negatives. And I would recommend that you ask a series of questions every time that you go through SWOT. I have some sample questions that you might take a look at inside each of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Another tool that is very important is a tool called process mapping, and there are different varieties of process maps. Process maps are absolutely central to process improvement. In LeanEnterprise sorts of approaches, a really important tool is called value stream mapping, which we'll talk about only very briefly here. In a Lean class, maybe we'd talk about it more briefly. On the other hand, I'm going to provide you with a link to a lecture from MIT that lasts about 34 minutes and gives you sort of an overview of value stream mapping all by itself, and that may be of interest to you to watch if you are so inclined. I would recommend it. So let's see what we've got. There are going to be a few different types of process maps that we might consider. We might consider a high-level process map, or a top-down process flow map, or deployment flow charts, or detailed process flow charts. Now, I think we've actually talked about these previously, but if not, let's hit them here. So oftentimes when we talk about a high-level process map, I call that a COPIS map or a SIPOC map. SIPOC is the way that things are actually done in business. Okay? SIPOC are the way things are actually done. That is, we obtain things from suppliers. Let's look at this graph and move right to left. So across from right to left. The way that business is actually executed is that we obtain things from suppliers. Those are the inputs into our processes, which produce the outputs that then go to our customers. So that is the main part. Now, in a lot of courses, you'll see just as IPO, inputs, processes, outputs, that are emphasized. But the broader perspective says we obtain things from suppliers. Those are the inputs into our processes that are transformed into outputs for our customers. That's how business proceeds. However, if you have the opportunity, what you really want to do is determine how you want to carry out SIPOC before you actually do SIPOC. In other words, the reverse flow. And that is called COPIS, C-O-P-I-S. And here's the idea. So now you're proceeding with customer co-creation, let's say, of your processes and so on. We're going to proceed from left to right across this graph. And proceeding from left to right, this would say, and we talked about this early in the course, when we talked about things like the Kano customer needs model. It would say we really want to solicit, understand, and dissect the customer voice. What is it they really need? What is it they really want? How are we positioned to deliver those things? The voice of the customer. Deeply, deeply, deeply understand them. Once we have that in depth, then we can better determine the outputs that will really meet those needs and those expectations of customers that align with what it is that we as an organization do. Understanding what those outputs are will allow us to configure our processes appropriately so that they deliver to customers those outputs with minimum waste, maximum efficiency, maximum effectiveness, maximum value returned to the customer, and maximum margin relative to our pricing considerations and market sorts of constraints that may be out there, but nevertheless maximize our margin maybe. So solicit from customers, understand the voice of the customer, exactly what outputs they need so that we can configure our processes best to deliver those, which will allow us to then better understand the exact inputs that we're going to need for our processes, and hence which suppliers to work with so that we deliver in the end the very best thing possible for our customers and build our own reputation and brand in so doing. So that's a high-level process map. A top-down flowchart looks like this. It says the what's. You're focusing on the what's. So the way that you carry this out is you list the fundamental or the major process steps. Those are the A, B, C, D, E that you see. And it says limit your list to about 5 major steps in your process. Write those down in the order they occur. This is called a flow chart. So in the order they occur, from left to right across the top of that surface. And then what you would do is list the subtask, if you will, right, in order of occurrence, the major sub-processes or subtasks that compose A, B, C, D, E. And we would typically want to limit these to somewhere between about no more than 5 or 6. Okay? The fact that you see B1 and B2, it could be that these are just in list form. It could be that these are in order. If at all possible, you list in sequence. If there's no set sequence, you just list the major things. But since this is a flow chart, generally speaking, you would anticipate that there is a sequence going on within A, within B, within C, within D, within E, since in fact there is a sequence from A to B to C to D to E. Top-down flow chart. The what's. What has to be done? What are you going to do? Deployment flow chart. That's the what's and the who's. So again, you want to list the fundamental process steps in the order they occur. That's similar to A, B, C, D, E that you just saw. So across the top of your writing surface, instead of listing A, B, C, D, E, what you're going to do is you're going to list the names of the people or the organizations that are involved in the process. Beneath those names of those responsible for the first step, you draw a box. And you list what the step is in that box. If there are other entities that assist or advise those with primary responsibility, list that and draw an oval around it, just so that they're connected. Connect the oval to the boxes. And then repeat that process for the second and subsequent steps, for A, for B, for C, for D, and E. And in that way, you have the what's, the A, B, C, D, E, and so on, but you also happen to have who's involved, whether that who is an individual or whether that who is a unit inside the organization, or whether it's even an external organization, as, for example, a supplier. So you would have something like this. And notice that you are still maintaining flow or sequence from A to B to C to D to E, and in this case to F. But you happen to also have in these ovals, you would have those minor contributors, or not the primary responsible. Primary responsible for A is whatever entity 1 is. But entity 4, whatever that is, they're contributing. Once you're done with A, you move to B. In B, we can see that we have entity 4 and entity 5 who are contributing, but primarily the responsibility for B resides with both 2 and 3. Once we're done with B, we go to step C. We can see that entity 5 is a contributor, but the primary responsibility for step C is entity 1 and entity 2. Done with C, we move to D. Entity 1 and entity 3 contribute, but D is primarily, that is the responsibility of entity 5. And done with that, we move to step E. Step E, that is solely the responsibility of entity 4, let's say. Hence you see no ovals. And done with E, we move to F, and we can see that step F is the responsibility of 3 and 4, primarily, but there is contribution from both entity 5 and entity 2. So that's called a deployment flowchart. And then there's a detailed flowchart. So there may be some of you who, like me, are a little bit older, or maybe you've had a really detailed computer programming course. And in that case, when you were in a programming course, so I learned to program in Fortran and BASIC and machine language and a few other things. Not that I retain any of that, but in any case, I had to learn all those things way back when. In fact, instead of typing instructions in on a computer, when I first became involved, I became involved with 2 computers, a CDC Control Data Corporation Cyber PDP-11, and then with an IBM computer. With the IBM computer, you may have seen these antiques called punch cards, about this big, okay, about that big each. And you would have a series of instructions, one on each punch card. And then you'd have a stack of cards, just like having a deck of cards that you play a game with, poker or whatever. You would have a stack of cards, and those would run through a card reader, and that's how your program was executed. That was with the IBM machine. With the Cyber CDC PDP-11, with that one, that was on what was called paper tape, and it was literally just a strand of paper, long strand of paper, very narrow, and that would get punched instead of punch cards. So it was paper tape. And boy, you sure didn't want to drop your deck of cards or anything like that. But what had to happen back then was that you had to really understand exactly the flow of how this was going to work. So there would be different symbols for different types of boxes and activities and things like that. I'm not paying very close attention to what those are. But the idea is that you list out your process in great detail from where it starts to where it ends, okay? And all of the steps that go in here. So for example, this would say we start up here, we perform some particular operation. Once we do that, we have a decision to make. If whatever we're asking there that has a decision to be made about, if the answer is no, then we document and we do some other things, and we move off in this direction. If the answer is yes, we move in this direction. So, highly detailed, step by step by step by step by step. And in fact, it used to be that in certain parts of Hewlett-Packard, where I used to do a lot of consulting, if you had a problem with your process and you went to a colleague, a coworker, and you said, hey, I need some help with my process, one of the first things that you were going to be asked was, oh, where's your flowchart or where's your process map? And if you said, I don't have it, they would expect you to go get it. But if what you really meant is, no, I actually don't have one, then generally speaking, that colleague or coworker would not waste their time with you because you hadn't invested your thought and your time in trying to understand your process that you're asking them for help with. Okay? Now, I always recommend 2 of these for every process. 2. As is, so that you can understand what it really looks like, and then as best you can conceive it, what the ideal would look like. Because any difference between as is and ideal may offer some easily identified low-hanging fruit that low-hanging fruit means easily accomplished, that you can easily improve the process without a lot of investment or time or resources. But you can improve it easily, and then you can still focus on the bigger picture, on the more detailed things. So that's a detailed flowchart. I mentioned in the last lecture that we would talk about 5S in the House of Lean. Now, 5S is the way that a lot of people organize their work environments and how a lot of companies organize their work environments. But it also happens to be the way that a lot of people who have seen this sort of approach organizes their workshop in their garage at home, or how they organize their kitchen and where everything is in the kitchen. For example, my wife does this just inherently. It's just part of her nature to do these sorts of things on a routine basis that you're going to see. And one of the places she does that is in the kitchen, but truth of it is she does it relative to her work and elsewhere in the home and just about everything she does. So 5S stands for 5 particular Japanese words. And I will probably mispronounce them, but they all start with S in Japanese. Saiton, Seiso, Saiketsu, Siri, and Shitsuke. We would say, to keep the S going on in English, we might say something like set in order, shine, standardize, sort, sustain. Okay. Something like that. So set in order. Well, let's see what we do first. Here's where we'd actually start. We'd start with sort, let's say. So with sort, we separate, sorry about that, needed items from unneeded items. And we get rid of the unneeded items. We get rid of them. Boom, gone. I haven't worn this shirt in 5 years. Get rid of it. You're not going to wear it again. Give it to Goodwill, do whatever. Get it out of here. Okay? I haven't looked at this book in 17 years. And I don't have any particular emotional attachment. It doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of value. Get rid of it. Okay? Get rid of it. Now, all of the books that you see on the shelf behind me, those all have particular meaning for me. Most of them are collectibles. I have a large collectible science fiction collection, a large collectible astronaut section. So historic, new, I have several. They all mean something to me, everything that you see behind me, and a lot more that I have. But that's me. But if I didn't have those emotional attachments and frankly some value attachments to those, then I would be saying, okay, let's get rid of these. So I can tell you that every time I've moved in my career, and I moved, let's say, from my first job post-PhD at Bradley University in Illinois to the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. I got rid of a lot of books and things. A lot of paper documents, since paper was important then. When I moved from the Rochester Institute of Technology a few years later to the University of North Texas in Denton, Texas, I did the same thing. When I moved from North Texas to Colorado State University, I did the same thing. When I left Colorado State University after 13 years, you can imagine I had a lot more buildup because I wasn't really good about following 5S. I got rid of more than 700 books in one fell sweep. At the same time, I sent a lot of books that were out of date by U.S. standards or U.S. educational standards, but nevertheless had really strong content. I sent a bunch of books to Ghana in Africa that could be used over there. And I did that at the request of some colleagues in Ghana. So the point is, I got rid of a lot. I did a lot of the sorting, I got rid of a lot. But what 5S anticipates is that that is done much more frequently, at the very least annually. Okay? So sort, get rid of what's not needed. Then deal with what is needed, what remains. So set in order, orderliness as it might be called. Keep the needed items in the right place and allow easy and fast retrieval. So what that means is that the things that you're going to use more frequently, make sure that they're easily accessible and know precisely where they're at. Have a system. Shine. Keep the workplace swept and clean. Keep your desktop clean. If you saw my desktop right now, it's relatively clean. I say relatively because, well, I always have a drink with me. You know that. It's probably not wherever the cup came from. In this case, this is iced tea that I made at home that's sitting in a Burger King cup. Okay, sometimes it's a McDonald's cup, and who knows what might be in it, but it's oftentimes the drink from McDonald's, but just as often iced tea or something like that I made at home. Okay, but if I'm sitting here doing a lecture as I am right now, then okay, I've got some things on my desktop that wouldn't ordinarily be sitting there. The drink and something to set it on. Okay, I have my phone sitting on the desktop. I wouldn't ordinarily have it there. I'd have it in my back pocket. I have it sitting there in case I need it for certain other uses. I have some handwritten instructions that are sitting on my desk that are not normally sitting on my desk. They're sitting on my desk right now because they're instructions for how it is that we record this video and then how it is that we save it to QuickTime and upload it and all of those sorts of things. Ordinarily, though, that would be in one specific place in my central desk drawer, and I know exactly where that is. Now, I am not by any means accomplished in 5S. I'm really not. My wife is, I'm not. But there are certain things that I do that follow this sort of principle. And I do it a lot better after she forces me into it about once a year. So, shine, keep it clean. Standardize. Create a consistent approach with which tasks and procedures are done. Standardized cleanup. On Mondays, I sweep. On Tuesdays, I polish the floor. On Wednesdays, I clean off the computer screens, and so on. A consistent approach with which tasks and procedures are done and when, why and when. And then, you know, you go round and round and round. This is a cycle. It's a 5S framework, but it's not a one-time activity. It is something that you do ongoingly. And so a lot of times what I recommend is, for example, when you're sorting, okay, if you haven't used it in 5 years or some amount of time, you determine the amount of time, get rid of it. Okay? If you're not sure, but you haven't used it in some intermediate amount of time, then put it in a box, label it, and at the end of some additional predetermined amount of time, if you still haven't used it, then get rid of it. Okay. So, but these are ongoing cyclical activities, some of which are much more frequent. We sort less often, but sometimes we sort as we go. I need this paper, I don't need that paper. I need this document, I will never need that document, get rid of it. Okay. I need these documents once a year when it's income tax time. Have them in a specific place, know where to get them and how to find them and all that. Okay. But it's cyclical, ongoing. That's why you see the arrows pointing in the direction where they are. But in the middle, you see this last part, sustain. And you see that word in parentheses underneath discipline. And the idea is exactly that. This is a discipline. But for people who do it well, or for companies that do this well, that discipline becomes just part of the culture for that organization or that individual mindset. It's how they do things. That's what culture is, how we do things around here. And there are companies that are incredibly good about this. So when I pointed out, I believe last time, a video for a company in Ferndale, Washington, I said, take a look at this. And I pointed out a shadow board on that where they had their tools placed. Okay, having their tools placed like that, that is very consistent with 5S. But if you watch that video, which is, as I recall, is about 14 minutes, if you watch that video, you will see how this sort of stuff plays out on an organizational level, not just for a single process or a single person, on an organizational level. In that case, a whole plant level. So sustain. Make this stuff a habit. That's 5S. Mr. 5S, I would say, is a colleague of mine from Hong Kong named Sam Ho. So you can find a lot of things out there from Sam Ho on 5S. And then what I have is a little bit more description for you on the 5S's. And you can take a look at that. It's also sitting out there in Wikipedia. And then there are some additional S's that are out there related to safety, security, and satisfaction. And I will let you take a look at those on your own as well. But recognize that I could ask you questions about 5S, including these additional S's, when it comes time for an exam or assignment, whatever you want to call what we do. Shadowboard. There you go. There are a couple examples on top after 5S. Look how easy those are. Notice that on the board over to the right upper corner, notice that you see something traced out here and it's missing. It's traced out because when you see that, you know exactly where it goes on this board. So apparently this tool, whatever that tool is, looks like a caulking gun or something like that almost from what I'm looking at, or a nail gun maybe or something like that. Actually, it looks more or less like this, doesn't it? But this one goes here and that plays upside down. They don't look quite identical. So whatever it is, it goes back there and nowhere else. It isn't left sitting around. It's in use. When it's not in use, it's right here. And anything that isn't right there, you know is in use. And if there's something missing, you know exactly what's missing. Okay. So shadow boards, as they're called. But notice what they've got. Here are some activities. Here are some daily activities. Vacuum inside daily. And these things are whatever these things are, instructions, are sorted in very different places. Now, by my standards, this place down here looks actually pretty good, but that's my standards. My individual, my personal standards, I'd say, well, my garage is looking great. But for somebody who's more organized, this is that same space before 5S and after, and they know exactly where to go to get what they need. Notice that they've implemented a shadow board and some other things. Notice that on the shelves are very clearly labeled what goes where. Okay. So before 5S, which I would say was actually not bad relative to a lot of things I've seen, or even relative to my own activities, if I'm going to be honest with you. But here's afterwards. Another video from 5S that would be interesting and worthwhile for you to look at. It's only 12 minutes. This one happens to be, as I recall, there are maybe two videos here, one from Gemba Academy. That's the 12-minute interview, but I think I also, or overview rather, but I think I also have one at FedEx. So link here as well. Here's another one, an 8-minute overview, really worth taking a look at, and I recommend that you do so. Remember that when it comes time for assignments and so on, I'm anticipating that you've watched every video that's in there. Toyota production system, we've talked about. There's a video here for you to watch if you want. That's why you can see the link as I hover over that TPS. And that would take you to a quick 8-minute video, I think, overview on the Toyota production system, along with 5S and just-in-time and KAIZEN. So it's a little bit more of a catch-all. We talked about trying to move toward what's called one-piece flow, where we only produce one item at a time according to actual demand. Now, the closer that we can get to that, the better. But what happens in so many places is instead batch production, where we produce 100 of this thing, and then we produce 50 of the next thing, and then 75 of the next thing, and then we're back to the first thing, and we produce 80 or whatever. Batch production. For companies that become better and better and better and better in lean and in the Toyota production system, then they move closer and closer to not 100, 75, 80, 50, and so on. Instead, they're looking at 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 on an on-demand basis. One-piece flow, only produce according to actual demand, exactly when needed. Now that's the ideal. But of course, the closer we can get to that, the better. So, here's a situation where things look different. This would be a lot of, or a batch of 10 items. Well, if we could get to the place where we didn't have to produce 10 at a time, but we could produce 5 at a time and then do something else in between, that would be great. Lots of size 5. Maybe we could get down, instead of a batch of 10 items or 2 batches of 5 each, maybe we could get to 5 batches of only 2 each, okay, and do other things in between. So instead of producing light orange boxes, maybe in between lot 1 and lot 2 of these light colored orange boxes, we're producing some other type of box or some other type of container. And then single piece flow says we only produce one at a time as needed. So that's just sort of a graphical illustration. Large lot approach does something like this. We produce a whole bunch of A's, then a whole bunch of B's, and then a whole bunch of C's, and so on. Versus small lots, which is better. Says we need an A, we produce an A. We need a B, we produce a B. Then an A, then a B, then a C. And so on. So we're trying to do something like this. This would say we needed 2 consecutive B's. So that looks closer to one-piece flow, as you see on bottom. And there is another video for you here to watch, a fairly short one. But it's the idea of one-piece flow versus mass manufacturing. And as I recall, this is going to be stuffing envelopes. And it's going to be stuffing one envelope at a time, start to finish, one-piece flow, versus doing a whole bunch of things, a single step a whole bunch of times, and then the next step a whole bunch of times, and then the next step a whole bunch of times. So let's say 10 envelopes in that way, versus doing one envelope, then one envelope, then one envelope, then one envelope. And you'll see some changes in efficiency by going to that one-piece flow. And then lastly, for this particular lecture, just a very quick and dirty overview, a few highlights of value stream mapping, with the idea that one of the last slides in here provides you with a 30-plus minute lecture on value stream mapping coming from MIT. And that is worth watching. I wouldn't say that it's highly entertaining, but it's worth watching. So what is a value stream? Those are all activities, both the value-added ones and the non-value-added ones, required to bring a product from a raw material state to a finished product in the hands of a customer. That's a value stream. Now, what we want to be able to do is to, in eliminating waste, to get rid of as many non-value-added steps or activities as possible. And the ones that we can't eliminate, we want to make as efficient as possible. So bring a customer requirement from order to delivery, or bring a design from concept to launch. Those would be examples of value streams that you might look at. So what are the key elements of a value stream? Of a value stream map, as I should probably describe it. First, identify and specify both what does and what does not create value from the perspective of the customer. 2, identify all the steps necessary to order, design, and produce across the entire value stream to highlight non-value added waste. Structure those activities that create value to flow without interruption, without detours, without backflows, waiting, or scrap. So we're trying to improve flow, value flow. Only make what is pulled by the customer just in time. So we're trying to get to one-piece flow. That's number 4. And number 5, as transparently as possible, as dynamically as possible, so that you see changes as they occur. Create dynamic transparency of strategies, cost, and information in the value stream. 6, address competitive advantages at the value stream network level, moving past simple buyer-supplier partnership discussions. Okay, what are the real competitive advantages? Use the value stream mapping for analysis, as a diagnosis, and implementation of change. And then 8th, focus on key processes, not just separate business departments. You'll lose the necessary level of detail if you only focus on separate business departments. 9th, address the entire supply chain over time rather than focusing on short-term improvement of individual facilities. You get more impact, greater impact by focusing on the entire supply chain over time than you do by focusing on short-term improvement of individual facilities. 10, strive for perfection by continually removing successive layers of waste as they are uncovered. When you think you've removed all waste, there's more there. That is almost assured that when you think you've removed all waste, no, you haven't. There's still some there. You just aren't able to see it yet because you aren't refined enough in your understanding of what's happening, or because you've been so focused on things that weren't what's still there. So, here's an example of a value stream mapping. And there's a difference in the elapsed time, the amount of time that it takes from the time an order was placed until it's actually delivered, 30 days, versus the activities that actually create value from the customer perspective. Of those 30 days, only 1 hour and 25 minutes. So you can see that, for example, as it says, you have a customer, they place their order over the internet. Well, that only takes 3 minutes. Okay, the producer processes the order. They order materials from suppliers. It takes them only 15 minutes to do that, but it takes 2 weeks for the things to get there. So the supplier ships the material. So, okay, they shipped the material. It took 2 weeks to get to that point. It takes 2 additional days in transit. That's not value added, is it? This isn't value added. Not really, but it is a necessary activity. These are necessary activities. Once the supplier ships the material and there's 2 days in transit time, then they need to make the thing. This was just the materials needed to make whatever it is you were making. So they produce then whatever needed to be produced. It took 1 hour. But it was in queue for 10 days as it moved through the process. And after 30 days, the customer says, oh, look, I got it. I got it. So finally got it. Why 30 days? Well, here's the question. That's the question the customer is saying. Here's what happened. Here's what the customer is saying. Oh, wow, I finally got it, but why in the world did it take 30 days? As an example, way back on May 8th of 2020, my wife and I ordered 3 doors for our home. The first 2 of those doors, we were promised 8 weeks, and that was a disruption due to COVID-19. So normal time would have been far less than 8 weeks. So mid-July is when they should have been installed, according to what we were told, even with the influence of COVID. The first 2 doors were installed 3 months after that, in mid-October. And the last door was installed about 2 months after that, just a little before Christmas 2020. And in fact, we are now dealing with some problems in the installation. So that's, where we're at right now. Well, in the analog here, the customer says, well, I finally got it, but why was it 30 days? Well, it was 30 days because the manufacturer shipped widgets, and that was 2 days of just the stuff on a truck, basically. Inventory storage, packing, shipping, all that. Well, it only took 10 months of actual work, but that was 2 days in queue. Inspection, 10 minutes each. So a lot of things like that are the things that have taken the time. And very little of that is actually value added. So the order was something like this. Here's the flow. So there you go. They placed their order. Customer placed order. Took time, 2 weeks lead time, but the order got put in on the company end of things. The supplier shipped the material, 2 days in transit, production of custom widgets, 1 hour of value added, but 10 days queue time. Then each one of those widgets had to be inspected, 10 minutes each, let's say. That doesn't add any value to anything, does it? Inventory, storage, packing, shipping, all that, 10 minutes total time, 2 days of queue time. Manufacturer ships the widgets, 2 days in transit. And the customer says, I finally got it, but wow, 30 days. Why 30 days? Here it is. There's the why. Notice that very little of this is actually value added. And then there is a video for you. This is the lecture that I told you about coming out of MIT. And it will show you just a little bit on the basics of value stream mapping. But otherwise, we're not going to deal with any more value stream mapping in here. So that is the end of content for this lecture. This takes us up at Forte State University to spring break of 2021. So this is the end of material for you for the second large assignment, which is due about 1 week after we return from spring break. So from right now until the time that your assignment, whatever you want to call it, will be due, is roughly 3 weeks. Okay, I will wish you luck with all of that. Be sure to watch all the videos in this particular lecture as well as the other lectures that you've seen, whether those are on queuing or capacity or anything else that we've covered. Watch the videos. Remember, I could always ask you a question about video content. So talk to you soon.